Hello BookTube. I'm going through my older videos from 4 years ago, 2016, and doing a feature I call TBR TBR, where we go through a lot of, I hope all of the new books that I've received, that I've opened packages for on camera, and revisit them. In a lot of cases, visit them for the first time. Where you were in the video, I was showing you what I had received in the mail, but I had not read it yet. So we're going. I have the mini me here. We're going back at those earlier videos and seeing what jumps out after 4 years. Almost exactly 4 years. A lot of the videos that I'm looking at today are in late June of 2016, when I have my beautiful pointer, Malin Moore, laying right next to me on the couch. And you can't see it. In every one of those videos, you can't see it, but she's right next to me on the right-hand side, and right underneath my left arm, my left elbow, is my Basset Hound Lucy. I was bracketed by two dogs in all of those videos, even though you almost never see Lucy. She was sound asleep, like a piece of furniture, just immovable and hardly breathing. Malin is awake for a lot of these videos and watching me, waiting, because ordinarily I was patting her or soothing her. You can tell, you can look at these videos and see that she's getting weaker and sicker, and so was Lucy, but she's not on camera as much. And I remember being on that couch. I was on that couch with the girls. Probably I'd filmed videos that day. I remember the day that I smelled something and I looked over, and Malin was sound asleep right next to me on the couch, but she was voiding her bowels. She was pooping just right there, without any resistance at all, without any awareness at all, onto the couch. I remember the first time that happened, and it was probably on a video. I would film videos every day, so probably it was. And seeing her on the couch in these videos reminds me of all that. Reminds me of all the good stuff and the bad stuff. Reminds me of, and you can see it. You can see this process happening on camera if you watch these videos, video after video. You can see that she has progressively harder time getting herself up and down off that couch until finally she can't do it at all. She can't get up or down on her own. Anyway, I made a long list of the books from a few videos. I thought we'd just go through them and briefly talk about whether or not they stick out in my memory. And I'm afraid to say a lot of these don't, and that's probably predictable. Most books that are published are not particularly memorable. Most books that I read are not particularly memorable. So I want to be honest to that. I don't want to shine a brighter light on these than they deserve. So let's just go through a couple of dozen of these. The first one is a novel, The Motion of Puppets by Keith Donohoe, which is a modern-day psychological quasi-horror thriller that had no interest whatsoever. I mean, it was competently done, but nothing sticks in the memory. Unlike, for instance, the next one, which is Tahmina Anam's book, The Bones of Grace, which was very good. Very, very good look at Bangladeshi life. Very good look at a very well-drawn central character. Ordinarily, the central character is a woman who obeys her family's wishes for basically an arranged marriage, and all the complications that flow from there. But that basic concession right there on the part of the author would, in a lot of books, lead to a feast of self-pity on the part of the author, and this is just a very clear, wonderfully written book. So Bones of Grace was very good. Then there was a historical novel, Mischling, by Affinity Konar, which is somewhat inevitable that somebody was going to write a book on this. It's a novel about a pair of twins who fall into the hands of Dr. Mengele at Auschwitz, who conducted all sorts of barbaric experiments on twins. He was fascinated by twins, and he documented it all, and he filmed a lot of it. And I don't advise you to go looking, probably on YouTube. Somebody has managed successfully to upload some of that film footage. I have seen quite a bit of that film footage, and it is extremely disturbing. Extremely so. It's Robert Lifton, who was no saint himself, wrote a book about the Nazi doctors in which he stressed that this was perhaps the greatest refinement of evil for which the Nazis were responsible. And I might agree with that, but despite that fact, Mischling itself did not stand out for me. The novel did not stand out for me. It's subject matter, of course, but that's no free pass for a novelist, and this one, it didn't really do it. Then a translated novel, Agnes by Peter Stamm, translated by Michael Hoffmann. Barely remember anything about it. Didn't register with me at all. Then we have a big work of history, The Mistresses of Clivenden by Natalie Livingstone, all about one sumptuous English house and the women who ran it while their men were away running the country and colonizing other countries. And this is it's just wonderful. It's just wonderful. The author has delved into all of the records to find everything about these women. And they are, as you might guess, remarkable, almost all of them. So I just loved it. I don't have a copy. I looked right away when I was done with reviewing the video. I looked right away for a copy of it. I don't have it. I must have sent it to somebody. Then we have Summerlong by Peter S. Beagle, the author of The Last Unicorn and A Fine and Quiet Place, a great modern fantasy writer. Summerlong isn't memorable at all. It wasn't. Peter S. Beagle's books are usually in his prime. They were gorgeously written and wonderfully controlled and organized in such a way that you don't even notice it at first. And this wasn't any of those things. It was all the worst aspects of what we usually refer to as late style, unfortunately. Then we have A Quiet Place by Seicho Matsumoto. This is a Japanese detective novel in translation. The book's publicity information laid a lot of stress on the fact that the detective and the star of the show is a contented family man, soft-spoken, poet, whatnot. That he's not a firebrand like was popular at the time and is still. Unfortunately, in addition to all those things, the main character is also boring, and so was the story. So I don't know if that's a fault of the translation. There were several points in the book where I felt the translator sort of trying to hide behind the curtain and failing. So I don't know if maybe the translator was at fault. Then we have The Heart of the Declaration by Stephen Pincus. This is an examination of the Declaration of Independence, the processes that gave birth to it here in America, and the most important elements in it. Unfortunately, not very memorable. This is usually an author I like a lot, but this book is a minor work. And then we have The Word Detective by John Simpson. This was a book in which the author digs into the Oxford Dictionary and etymology. And I don't know what to say about etymology. It fascinates some people to what I consider to be an almost necrophilic extent. It's never had any interest for me at all. None whatsoever. I know a lot of people who have an interest in it that they manage to control, and they can be fascinating on the subject, but as my experience has been that there's almost nothing that will more readily identify the stultifying pedants in any party attendance, for instance, than etymology. That it's etymology that will get pedants to come out of the woodwork and be insufferable because they think they're on solid ground, when actually there isn't ever any solid ground for pedantry. And that I've had that happen to me on a number of different occasions, a number of literary events in Boston and in New York, where suddenly an etymology freak just came out and started saying, I think isn't it really interesting that this word derives from such and such? And I would say, no, that's in fact just a plain objective fact, not interesting at all. Plenty of other times I would just end one of their disquisitions by saying, yeah, but who at all cares? And there is no answer to that. It's just a barren obsession. There are a lot of books on that particular obsession. The Word Detective is one of them. I'm not meaning to castigate the book. The author does a companionable enough job, but you have to be interested in etymology or you're not going to be interested in the book. The book is not going to make you interested. And that's a sign of your own mental health. The next two, The Heavens May Fall by Alan Eskens and Alligator Creek by Lotte Guttry, were fiction, contemporary fiction. Neither one of them, one's historical and one's not, neither one of them really made an impression on me at all. Not worth your time to hunt out unless you read up on their subject matter and think, okay, well, the subject matter interests me so much that I don't need the book to be interesting, to be well done. I know some readers like that. I always want to tell them, you shouldn't be like that. You only have so much time. You shouldn't be so interested in a subject that you're willing to wade through dreck. But those people over the years have rightly reposted to me that I have read hundreds of Star Trek novels. So maybe they have a point. The next one is The Earth is Weeping by Peter Cozzens, which is a big and bare knuckle, a brutal history of the American Indian Wars in 19th century America. Terrific book. Just terrific. Everything you want a book like that to be. And the next one is a huge one, I think from Oxford University Press, called Toward Democracy by James Kloppenberg, which is a historical study, but it also threaded throughout and becoming more powerful as the book goes on, is a thematic study, almost a political philosophy study of democracy, of the way that it begins, the way that it grows, the way that it mutates. The author doesn't spend a whole lot of time, since he wrote in 2016, he didn't know what we know now, he doesn't spend a whole lot of time concentrating on how democracies can be imperiled and how they can die. We're in a much more pointed face-to-face confrontation with that subject now in 2020 than the whole world was in 2016. How do democracies die? How do free people hand over their freedom? And why? That isn't so much an element in Toward Democracy. Toward Democracy is big and boisterously good. Just wonderful. Just wonderful. Then we have a thriller, Panacea by F. Paul Wilson. This is an author I have read a huge amount of his work, but his books just never completely ignite. They always have a wonderful gimmick, a wonderful hook, and sometimes a wonderful character here and there, but never much more than that, and this is one of those. It's predictable from the first chapter. Everything that's going to happen in it, you can predict from the first chapter, which is not necessarily bad. I don't need books to reinvent the wheel. But if a book is predictable from the first chapter and yet it bills itself as a thriller, well, it can't do both, right? If the author isn't working to subvert anything, if the author isn't working to change or adapt anything, then a book that's predictable from the first chapter can be a whole bunch of things. There's a whole bunch of fairly undigested exposition in this book, in Panacea, that was pretty interesting. It can be a whole bunch of things, but it can't be a thriller because you're never going to be on the edge of your seat. You're never going to be wondering what happens next. So I wouldn't recommend it, even in this author's works. F. Paul Wilson, if I remember correctly, wrote the Repairman Jack series. That's what I would recommend, not any of the others. Then A Whole Life by Robert Seethaler and Accidents Will Happen by Oliver Cam. Both very forgettable. Both, I appreciate the publisher sending to me, but I don't think I was ever tempted to write about either one of them. Then A People's History of the American Revolution by Ray Raphael. Fairly sizable history of the American Revolution that is based on false premises, as you can tell right from the Howard Zinn type title. A People's History of the United States Revolution, of the American Revolution, is right away operating from a bad premise, and this book doesn't know that and just keeps going about how common, ordinary people, the Petey Punch Clock and whatnot, that how they rose up and threw off the tyranny, the chains of their oppressors, and Howard Zinn was pumping that same kind of garbage for 40 years, and you don't know what to do about it. I read a book like that, and I don't know what to do about it. By far, the enormous majority of people in the colonies at the time of the American Revolution were royalists. They were loyalists. They did not want to rebel against the crown. By far, the majority of all of those states were. Even Massachusetts. Most people in Massachusetts were loyalists. They did not want to rebel against the crown. There is no such thing as a history of the American Revolution that's a history from the ground up. The American Revolution, with very few exceptions, was conducted by wealthy men. And it was conducted by wealthy men in large part for a lot of the reasons wealthy men do everything, which is for their own bottom line, not for some sort of ideological progress. I mean, I'm the world's greatest champion of Samuel Adams, who had a tax-related job in Massachusetts and was the first person in the history of the world to leave that job poorer than he entered it. But most of the other people, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, John Hancock, most of the other people, the leaders of the Revolution, if you want a one-volume introduction to the American Revolution, I can make you 20 recommendations better than this one. Then the next one was a big, tough book. I remember really enjoying it. I don't know where it ended up. I sent it somewhere. I don't have it anymore, but I remember there were large parts of it I really enjoyed. It's Russia's Path to Enlightenment by Gary Hamburg. I remember I got it as a naked hardcover, and it was a no-nonsense thing. It dug into the subject of, into the intellectual currents of Russia before Peter the Great, before Enlightenment came to Russia in any kind of limited fashion, and makes the case, a very good case, that had always been an active element of Russian intellectual life. I thought it was fascinating. I wish I still had it, but there's no way. It's probably $500 online, so there's no way I'm going to buy it. Whoever I sent it to, I must still have it, I hope. And then the last one is a biography. Well, hardly any biographies on this list. This is Not Pretty Enough by Jerry Hershey. It's her life of Helen Gurley Brown. Very, very good. A very, very good life. Probably the definitive life of Helen Gurley Brown, who deserves more attention than she gets. But anyway, that's your TBR TBR number 13. And all that's left is to pick the bean of the batch. And for the first time, I want a tie. Here, I can't narrow it down. I want to pick 2 books that are the best of the ones on this list to stand out for me. It's Kloppenberg's book, Toward Democracy, which you really should read, big as it is. I don't know if it ever came out in paperback. And the other is The Earth is Weeping by Peter Cozzens, about the Indian Wars. Just terrific. In addition to being heartbreaking and infuriating and necessary reading if you're an American, it's necessary for you to know that what you call the heartland, what I call the heartland, the Midwest, America's breadbasket, it's important for you to know that all of that land became what it is because genocidal wars were conducted over every inch of it to remove the original inhabitants, none of whom wanted to leave, and all of whom were willing to fight to stay against an unbeatable opponent. It's important to know that if you're an American. I'm not saying to tear down statues, I'm not saying to rename anything, but it's important to know that history. And Cozzens makes it really easy to know that history because this is a terrific book, in addition to being an important one. So I'm going to name both of those as the bean of the batch. And I'm gonna wrap this up. I'm not doing enough of these things. No matter how many books I put in any one episode, I need to do more of these if we're still stuck 4 years from now, for God's sake. But not today. So I will wrap this up for now, and I'll do another one of these next week, certainly Thursday, but maybe before then as well. So I'll wrap this up for now, but I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.